Hey guys, Chief here. This is the third video in the CIA Manual on Psychological Operations in Guerrilla Warfare audiobook series. In this video, I'm reading out Chapter 3, Armed Propaganda. Generalities. Frequently, a misunderstanding exists on armed propaganda that this tactic is a compulsion of the people with arms. In reality, it does not include compulsion, but the guerrilla should know well the principles and methods of this tactic. The objective of this section is to give the guerrilla student an understanding of the armed propaganda that should be used and that will be able to be applied in guerrilla warfare. Close identification with the people. Armed propaganda includes all acts carried out by an armed force, whose results improve the attitude of the people towards this force, and it does not include forced indoctrination. This is carried out by a close identification with the people on any occasion. For example, putting aside weapons and working side by side with peasants in the countryside, building, fishing, repairing roofs, transporting water, etc. When working with the people, the guerrillas can use slogans such as many hands doing small things, but doing them together. By participating in the tasks of the people, they can establish a strong tie between them and the guerrillas, and at the same time a popular support for our movement is generated. During the patrols and other operations around or in the midst of the villages, each guerrilla should be respectful and courteous with the people. In addition, he should move with care and always be well prepared to fight, if necessary. But he should not always see all the people as enemies, with suspicions or hostility. Even in war, it is possible to smile, laugh, or greet people. Truly, the cause of our revolutionary base, the reason why we are struggling, is our people. We must be respectful to them on all occasions that present themselves. In places and situations wherever possible, for example, when they are resting during the march, the guerrillas can explain the operations of the weapons to the youths and young men. They can show them an unloaded rifle so that they will learn to load it and unload it. Their use and aiming at imaginary targets, they are potential recruits for our forces. The guerrillas should always be prepared with simple slogans in order to explain to the people, whether in intentional form or by chance, the reason for the weapons. The weapons will be for winning freedom. They are for you. With weapons, we can impose demands such as hospitals, schools, better roads, and social services for the people, for you. Our weapons are, in truth, the weapons of the people, yours. With weapons, we can change the Sandino communist regime and return the people a true democracy so that we will all have economic opportunities. All of this should be designed to create an identification of the people with the weapons and the guerrillas who carry them. Finally, we should make the people feel that we are thinking of them and that the weapons are the people's in order to help them protect from a communist, totalitarian, imperialist regime indifferent to the needs of the population. Implicit and explicit terror. A guerrilla armed force always involves implicit terror because the population, without saying it out loud, feels terror that the weapons may be used against them. However, if the terror does not become explicit, positive results can be expected. In revolution, the individual lies under a constant threat of physical damage. If the government police cannot put an end to the guerrilla activities, the population will lose confidence in the government, which has the inherent mission of guaranteeing the safety of the citizens. However, the guerrillas should be careful not to become an explicit terror, because this would result in a loss of popular support. In the words of a leader of the Huk guerrilla movement in the Philippine Islands, the population is always impressed by the weapons, not by the terror that they cause, but rather by a sensation of strength/force. We must appear before the people, giving them the message of the struggle. This is, then, in a few words, the essence of armed propaganda. An armed guerrilla force can occupy an entire town or small city that is neutral or relatively passive in the conflict in order to conduct the armed propaganda in an effective manner. The following should be carried out simultaneously. Destroy the military or police installations and remove all survivors to a public place. Cut all the outside lines of communications, cables, radios, messengers. Set up ambushes in order to delay the reinforcements and all the possible entry routes. Kidnap all officials or agents of the government and replace them in the public places with military or civilian persons of trust to our movement. In addition, carrying out the following. Establish a public tribunal that depends on the guerrillas and cover the town or city in order to gather the population for this event. shame, ridicule, and humiliate personal symbols of the government of repression in the presence of the people, and foster popular participation through guerrillas within the multitude, shouting slogans and jeers. Reduce the influence of individuals in tune with the regime, pointing out their weaknesses and taking them out of town without damaging them publicly. Mix the guerrillas within the population and show very good conduct by all members of the column, participating the following. Any article taken will be paid for with cash. Any hospitality offered by the people will be accepted, and this opportunity will be exploited in order to carry out face-to-face persuasion about the struggle. Courtesy visits should be made to the prominent persons and those with prestige in the place, such as doctors, priests, teachers, etc. The guerrilla should instruct the population that with the end of the operative, and when the government repressive forces interrogate them, that they may reveal everything about the military operation carried out. For example, the type of weapons they use, how many men arrived, from what direction they came, and what direction they left. In short, everything. In addition, indicate to the population that meetings or in private discussion that they can give the names of the government informants who will be removed together with the other officials of the government repression. When a meeting is held, conclude it with a speech by one of the leaders of the guerrilla political cadres, the most dynamic, which includes explicit references to the fact that the enemies of the people, the officials or government agents, must not be mistreated in spite of their criminal acts, although the guerrilla force may have suffered casualties, and that this is all done due to the generosity of Christian guerrillas. Give a declaration of gratitude for the hospitality of the population, as well as let them know that the risks that they will run when the government's return are greatly appreciated. The fact that the government regime, although it exploits the people with taxes, control of money, grains, and all aspects of public life through associations, which they are forced to become a part of, will not be able to resist the attacks of our guerrilla forces. Make the promise to the people that you will return to ensure that the leeches of the government regime of oppression will not be able to hinder our guerrillas from integrating with the population. A statement repeated to the population to the effect that they can reveal everything about this visit of our commandos because we are not afraid of anything or anyone, neither the Soviets nor the Cubans, emphasize that we are Nicaraguans, that we are fighting for the freedom of Nicaragua and to establish a very Nicaraguan government. Guerrilla weapons are the strength of the people over an illegal government. The armed propaganda in populated areas does not give the impression that weapons are the power of the guerrillas over the people, but rather that the weapons are the strength of the people against the regime of oppression. Whether it is necessary to use armed force in an occupation or a visit to a town or village, guerrillas should emphasize making sure that they explain to the population that in the first place that this is being done to protect them, the people, and not themselves. Admit frankly and publicly that this is an act of democratic guerrilla movement, with appropriate explanations, that this action, although it is not desirable, is necessary because the final objective of the insurrection is a free democratic society where acts of force are not necessary. The force of weapons is a necessity caused by the oppressive system and will cease to exist when the forces of justice of our movement assume control. If, for example, it should be necessary for one of the advanced posts to have to fire on a citizen who is trying to leave the town or city in which the guerrillas are carrying out armed propaganda or political proselytism, the following is recommended. Explain that if the citizen had managed to escape, he would have alerted the enemy that is near the town or city, and they would carry out acts of reprisal such as rapes, pillage, destruction, captures, etc. It is this way, terrorizing the inhabitants of the place for having given attention and hospitalities to the guerrillas of the town. If a guerrilla fires at an individual, make the town see that he was an enemy of the people, and they shot him because the guerrilla recognized as their first duty the protection of the citizens. The command tried to detain the informant without firing because he, like all Christian guerrillas, espouses nonviolence. Firing at the government informant, although it is against his own will, was necessary to prevent the repression of the government against innocent people. Make the population see that it was the repressive system of the regime that was the cause of this situation, what really killed the informer, and that the weapon was one recovered in combat against the regime. Make the population see that if the regime had ended the repression, the corruptions backed by foreign powers, etc., the Freedom Commandos would not have had to brandish arms against brother Nicaraguans, which goes against our Christian sentiments. If the informant hadn't tried to escape, he would be enjoying his life together with the rest of the population, because he would not have tried to inform the enemy. This death would have been avoided if justice and freedom existed in Nicaragua, which is exactly the objective of the democratic guerrilla. Selective use of violence for propagandist efforts. It is possible to neutralize carefully selected and planned targets, such as court judges, MESTA judges, police and state security officials, CDS chiefs, etc. For psychological purposes, it is necessary to gather together the population affected, so that they will be present to take part in the act and formulate the accusations against the oppressor. The target or person that should be chosen on the bias of the spontaneous hostility that the majority of the population feels towards the target. Use rejection or potential hatred by the majority of the people affected toward the target, stirring up the population, making them see all the negative and hostile actions of the individual against the people. If the majority of the people give their support or backing to the target or subject, do not try to change these sentiments through provocation. Relative difficulty of controlling the person who will replace their target. The person who will replace their target should be carefully chosen based on the degree of violence necessary to carry out change, degree of violence acceptable to the population affected, degree of predictable reprisal by the enemy on the population affected or other individuals in the area of the target. The mission to replace the individual should be followed by extensive explanation within the population affected of the reason why it was necessary for the good of the people. Explain that the government retaliation is unjust, indiscriminate, and above all, a justification for the execution of this mission. Carefully test the reaction of the people towards the mission, as well as control this reaction, making sure that the population's reaction is beneficial towards the Freedom Commandos. Conclusions. Armed propaganda includes all acts executed and the impact achieved by an armed force, which, as a result, produces positive attitudes in the population towards this force, and it does not include forced indoctrination. However, armed propaganda is the most effective available instrument of a guerrilla force. Alright folks, well that was definitely a chapter, one that I feel like YouTube is not happy with me reading out loud. There were many parts, and I'll just recap. Generalities, close identification with the people, implicit and explicit terror, guerrilla weapons are the strength of the people over an illegal government, selective use of violence for propagandist efforts, and conclusions. I'm going to test the waters here with how much I can say about this chapter. Of course, close identification with the people. This is something that every chapter before has pushed for. Also, just for you guys to know, we are just about halfway through this book, so that's pretty good. Maybe a third. But I do agree. I mean, it's just good to be in with the local people. As well, it does reiterate slogans. Now, this will probably be seen as racist. I don't mean for it to be. But the Nicaraguan population could have been less developed back then, thus slogans were easy for them to remember. Though, I do think that slogans are pretty good nowadays. To speak politically, I think that's one thing the American left has, is really easy slogans that are hard to criticize. Things like Black Lives Matter. Very true statement, but a very evil purpose behind it. My body, my choice. It's a good idea, but at the same time, very evil movement behind it. I think slogans are very useful, though. Let's see. I feel as well, and I've talked about this with a few folks on YouTube. I'll probably be part of a podcast soon as well talking about this. But people that are in what I would call, what do they use in Red Dawn? It's controlled areas, or like behind enemy lines pretty much. Those in California, Oregon, Illinois, New York. Let's think. What else? I don't know other states that have bad laws. Especially in regards to firearms, but those that are in those places and yet in red counties, I feel like are the most apt to be part of your population, as they will most likely agree with you. though of course a dumb population does really help, no offense to them. I found the implicit and explicit terror section to be very brutally honest, such as destroying military police installations as well as their means of communication, and destroying their officials, which A, puts less faith in the government for the people, but B, I mean, it's just good for a movement. Of course, like I always say, I'm not advocating for violence or breaking the law, just reading a book, guys. I like that a lot of it is done in public, especially if you can have your own people in the crowd. Really useful. It is really shocking to me that it says the guerrillas should instruct the population that with the end of the operative, when the government repressive forces interrogate them, that they may reveal everything about the military operation carried out. I'm actually really surprised by that. It is a freedom that it gives to the people. As well, it is also a little kind of contradictory to where it says if a guy you need to kill is running away, kill him, and then blame that on him informing the government. Though I'm sure you could argue in a time of war, well, we'll allow you guys to do this after the conflict is over, but not now. He is an enemy traitor, whatever. I do like how it says to never take responsibility, but instead try to say this is your last resort. The selective use of violence for propagandist effects. That's really cool section. I will not be going much into that. I want to go back to one. Explain to the citizen if they had managed to escape, he would have alerted the enemy that is near the town or city, and they could carry out acts of reprisal such as rape, pillage, destruction, captures, etc. Very true. Nowadays it would be like pillage, captures, destructions, taxes, and arrests. Same as captures. But public hostility towards corrupt officials is a crazy thing that it calls out in here. Do with that what you will. Cool chapter. I think there's probably more that I'm missing inside there. Unless it's just very, very obvious in total. Let me look through the rest of the book. Actually, let me go back to the index here. So that was armed propaganda. Next we have armed propaganda teams, which is about 3 pages longer. Then organizations after that, control of mass concentrations and meetings. These are all going to be pretty small. But it is a really cool book. And I know the CIA has a few other ones out. I don't know if I'll read those, at least not soon, as I've never read those before. I have read this. But I would recommend you guys, like I've said previously, either by buying the book yourself and doing a deep study onto it, which, of course, I'll add anything in the comments. And I do recommend that you guys, if you have something to comment, if anything you believe in, add it down below. Overall, I think this is really good. When I read this, and it's pretty easy to do while reading, but I'm assuming as well while listening, theoretically, imagine this in your own environment. I have really gotten into it recently thinking, I was big into this when I started training. It's not that I fell out as much, but it's just been reiterated to me recently. Work with what you have in reality. I might have said this before on the first video, but I could train day after day, loading and unloading an imaginary M249 and tossing imaginary fragmentation grenades. But in reality, that does not help my training at all because I do not have fragmentation grenades and I do not have an M249. Doing actual dry fire and live fire training, as well as small unit tactics, is reality. So in this case, imagine on a place near you, not that you would ever take out these attacks, but it helps you understand both how this guerrilla warfare was conducted in the past, how guerrilla warfare and 5th generation warfare is conducted today. And I mean, it's a thought challenge of, if you're in the situation, how would you do it? Kind of cool. Thank you guys for watching. The next chapter is Armed Propaganda Teams, APTs. And just to go over the sections, generalities, techniques of persuasion and talking speeches. I remember that's a crazy section. Eyes and ears within the population, pretty obvious. a comprehensive team program, mobile infrastructure, and conclusion. So, hope to see you guys in the next video. Train hard, fight hard. God bless.